In the cold, unloving embrace of space, Captain Rafe Talon leaned back in his worn-out chair, a testament to a lifetime of bad decisions and worse posture. The recycled air of the starship Irony, named because fate has a sense of humor, smelled faintly of burnt coffee and the despair of unpaid bills. Rafe had seen better days, but not many, and certainly not since he took on a crew that could best be described as a deliberate mistake he continued to make. "Captain, we've got a problem," said Trix, his ship's engineer. A woman of few words and fewer morals, Trix had a penchant for solving technical issues with a hammer. It worked more often than you'd think. "There's a bloody huge ship up ahead just drifting. Looks like it's got a death wish." Rafe sighed, rubbing his temples. "Let me guess, Trix, you're suggesting we take a closer look." "Well, if by closer look you mean go in head first without a plan and hope we don't die, then yeah, that's exactly what I'm suggesting," Trix replied, her voice thick with irony. "They say the universe is vast and full of wonders. They also say it's full of things that want to kill you." Rafe had found more of the latter. The ship's navigator, a lanky man with a perpetual smirk named Zeke, piped up from his station. "That thing's got ancient alien trap written all over it. But hey, who am I to judge a bad idea when I see one?" "Zeke, remind me why we keep you around," Rafe muttered, though he already knew the answer. Zeke was the only one who could navigate the Irony without accidentally steering them into a black hole. Most days. As the Irony drew closer to the drifting dreadnought, its massive, foreboding structure loomed against the backdrop of stars like the universe's ugliest paperweight. It was alien in design, all sharp angles and menacing silhouettes, clearly not built for comfort or aesthetics. "Anyone else getting the distinct feeling we're not welcome here?" Rafe asked. "No one in particular." The silence of space was answer enough. "Captain, I'm picking up some weird signals," Trix said, her eyes darting over the ship's readings. "It's like, I dunno, creepy church music if churches were run by extraterrestrial psychopaths." Rafe chuckled, though there was no humor in it. "Great. Just what we need. The space version of a cult. At least it ain't boring," Zeke quipped, as he expertly maneuvered the Irony alongside the dreadnought. "Nothing worse than a dull mission. Unless it's one where you die horribly," Trix added helpfully. "Touché," Zeke conceded, nodding at Trix with mock seriousness. The boarding process was as uneventful as these things go, with only one minor explosion. Trix had insisted it was intentional, though her history suggested otherwise. "Welcome to the party," Rafe said as they stepped aboard the dreadnought, the air thick with dust and the promise of imminent doom. "Remember, we're just here to find out why this hunk of metal's parked in our neck of the galaxy and then get the hell out." The interior was as inviting as a politician's promise, with corridors that seemed to stretch on forever, each turn a new opportunity to regret walking through the last door. "Holy," Zeke began, stopping dead in his tracks. "Is that an altar?" Sure enough, they found themselves in what looked like a makeshift temple. Alien symbols adorned the walls, glowing with a sickly green hue that probably wasn't approved by any health and safety committee. "I don't know about you, but I'm getting the distinct feeling that these guys weren't fans of do unto others," Rafe said, eyeing the altar suspiciously. Trix snorted. "More like do unto others before they do unto you." Zeke walked over to a terminal, his fingers dancing over alien glyphs with surprising fluency. "Hey, I'm in, and guess what? These jokers were monitoring Earth, specifically the U.S. government." Rafe raised an eyebrow. "Infiltration or just good old-fashioned espionage?" "Maybe a bit of both," Zeke replied. "Looks like they were planning something big." "Great. Just what we needed," Rafe said, rolling his eyes skyward as if hoping for divine intervention. "I was really hoping to spend my weekend not saving the universe from an alien cult." "Well, looks like your calendar's full now," Trix said as she peered over Zeke's shoulder. "And what's this? A list of targets, high-profile ones. That explains a lot," Rafe muttered, feeling the weight of the universe press just a bit harder on his shoulders. "So, what's the plan, fearless leader?" Trix asked, a smirk playing on her lips. We get this info back to HQ, let them deal with it, Rafe said, though he knew it wouldn't be that easy. It never was. Preferably before these alien bastards realize we've gate-crashed their little party. It was then that the dreadnought seemed to stir, lights flickering on, engines humming to life as if it suddenly remembered its purpose. Cap," Zeke said, his voice suddenly serious. "I think we've overstayed our welcome." "No kidding," Rafe replied, motioning for the crew to make a hasty retreat. "Move it, people. This ship's waking up and I have a feeling we're not invited to the after-party." As they sprinted back to the Irony, alarms blared throughout the dreadnought, the ship's systems coming alive in a very unfriendly manner. "Next time, remind me to stay in bed," Rafe grumbled as they boarded their own ship, Trix slamming the door behind them. "Next time, remind me to blow up the scary alien ship before we board," Trix shot back, her fingers flying over the control panel to initiate a hasty retreat. The Irony lurched into motion, engines straining as they pulled away from the dreadnought, leaving the alien vessel in their rear view, metaphorically speaking. "Just another day in paradise," Zeke said, wiping sweat from his brow. "Yeah," Rafe agreed, though the dreadnought's ominous presence lingered in his mind. "And tomorrow we get to figure out how to save the world from an alien cult." As the Irony zipped through the void, leaving behind one mystery and heading straight into another, Rafe couldn't help but chuckle darkly. Because really, what else could you do but laugh when the universe seemed intent on screwing you over? "Set course for Earth," Rafe commanded, settling into his chair. "Let's go see how deep this rabbit hole goes after all." And with that, the stars stretched into infinity, the Irony speeding toward a future as uncertain as a politician's promise and twice as deadly. "Just another fine day in the universe," Rafe muttered to himself as he stared out into the endless void. "And to think I could have been a farmer. You know," Rafe mused as the Irony cut through the void of space like a rusty knife through old cheese, "I once thought about opening a little cafe on Europa. Serve coffee, pastries, the works. Wouldn't have to deal with alien cults and impending doom." Trix snorted, adjusting her seatbelt like it was a noose. "You, a cafe owner. You chat the customers to death or give them food poisoning. Isn't that what coffee shops are for?" Zeke piped up, still smirking like he knew a joke nobody else did. "Death by conversation or caffeine overdose." Rafe chuckled, though it was more of a nervous compulsion than actual amusement. The kind of laugh you'd let out when you realized the universe was actively trying to kill you and there wasn't much you could do about it. "All right, let's get back to figuring out how to save our skins. Trix, what's the status on the dreadnought's data dump?" "It's not good news if that's what you're fishing for," Trix replied, digging through a tangle of wires and screens. "Got a lot of encrypted files here, probably the alien equivalent of top secret. But I can tell you this much. Someone's been whispering sweet nothings to Earth bigwigs." "Human collaborators?" Rafe asked, more a statement than a question. Because why wouldn't there be? Humanity had a knack for screwing itself over, often with enthusiasm. "Looks that way," Trix confirmed, her tone as flat as a dead battery. "And if these files are right, they're not just sharing recipes." "Excellent. Treachery on the home front. Just what we needed," Rafe muttered. "Zeke, any thoughts?" "Yeah, I've got one," Zeke said, glancing over his shoulder with a grin that had seen better days. "Why don't we just let the aliens have him? Might improve the gene pool. Much as I love your approach to eugenics, Zeke, I think the galaxy might frown on us just handing over our own species to the alien cultists," Rafe replied. "But keep the ideas coming. They're almost as good as mine." Zeke tossed him a mock salute. "Aye, Captain." Coming up with terrible ideas since birth. As the banter bounced around the bridge like a rubber ball in a tin can, Trix finally managed to break through the encryption. The screen flickered, then displayed a list of names, some recognizable, others not so much. The kind of people who'd sell their own grandmother if it boosted their stock portfolio. "Here we go," Trix announced, pointing to a name that stood out like a sore thumb. "Senator Jarvis, that slime ball's been sucking up to aliens. Not just sucking up, Zeke noted, leaning over to squint at the data. Looks like he's been actively helping them infiltrate Earth's defense network. What a patriot. Rafe sighed, his head in his hands. Why is it always the ones with the most to lose that are willing to bet the farm on the dumbest ideas? Maybe because they live in a bubble and think consequences are bedtime stories, Trix ventured, tapping the screen like it owed her money. Or maybe they're just idiots, Zeke offered, because sometimes the simplest answer was the correct one. All right, so we've got human collaborators helping alien extremists. This complicates things, Rafe said, rubbing his temples like he could massage the cosmic bullshit away. How do we play this? Simple, Trix grunted, folding her arms. We make it public. Send this data to someone who will actually do something about it. Easier said than done, Rafe countered. We send this to the wrong people and it's going to end up buried or accidentally deleted. Zeke frowned. So we find someone outside the system, someone who can't be bought or bullied. Someone like us, Trix said, a wicked grin spreading across her face. Exactly, Rafe nodded. And I know just the right kind of unscrupulous bastard for the job. Zeke clapped his hands together, delighted. So who do we call? Space Ghostbusters? Galactic WikiLeaks. No, but close, Rafe said, planting himself in front of the navigation console. We're going to pay a visit to an old friend, a journalist with more guts than sense. Goes by the name of Jules Dagger. If anyone can blow this thing wide open, it's him. Jules Dagger, Trix mused, tapping her chin. Isn't he the one who got banned from half the known galaxy for calling a senator a spineless leech? And that was on a good day, Rafe confirmed. But he's got a nose for scandal and a moral compass that actually points somewhere. Better than yours, then, Zeke quipped, steering the irony toward the nearest jump gate. Where do we find this paragon of virtue? He's usually holed up around Locust Station, Rafe replied. If he's not there, we can always follow the trail of angry bureaucrats. As the irony powered through the jump gate, the familiar nausea of faster-than-light travel hit Rafe like a high school reunion. The ship shuddered as they shot through the colorful void, a kaleidoscope of cosmic indifference that reminded Rafe how small and insignificant he really was. Okay, so while we're playing intergalactic mailman, what's our plan B? Trix asked, her hands hovering over the controls like a pianist at a funeral. Plan B, Rafe repeated, scratching his chin. Don't die. Solid plan, Zeke said, nodding approvingly. Direct, to the point. Yeah, I've been working on it for years, Rafe replied, staring at the navigation display. Though, admittedly, results have been mixed. The irony emerged from the jump gate, the stars snapping back into focus around them. Locust Station loomed ahead, a sprawling mess of metal and ambition clinging desperately to the idea of order in a chaotic universe. It was the kind of place where dreams came to die and reality took a long lunch break. Home sweet home, Zeke said, guiding the irony toward a docking bay that looked like it had been through several wars and lost all of them. If it weren't for the perpetual threat of violence and disease, it might almost be charming. Let's not get too comfortable, Rafe advised as they docked with a bone-jarring thunk. We're here to find Dagger, pass along the intel, and get out before someone decides we'd look better in cuffs or a body bag. The docking ramp clattered down with all the grace of a drunkard on ice skates, and the crew disembarked into the chaos of Locust Station. The air was thick with the smell of burnt metal and desperation, a heady cocktail that reminded Rafe of home. Keep your eyes peeled, Rafe said, leading the way through a crowd that moved like a single, irritated organism. Dagger likes to hang out in the less reputable parts of town. How can you tell which parts those are? Zeke asked, dodging a vendor hawking questionable meat on a stick. Easy, Rafe replied, stepping around a puddle of something that had no business being indoors. Just follow the shouting. Sure enough, as they rounded the corner, they found themselves in a bar that could generously be described as a shithole. It was the kind of place where dreams went to die, took a nap, then died again just to be sure. And there in the corner sat Jules Dagger, a man who looked like he'd been put through a blender and come out grinning. His hair was a mess, His clothes were an assortment of stains pretending to be fabric, and he was holding court with a group of listeners who seemed half convinced he was a prophet and half convinced he was insane. "Dagger," Rafe called, weaving his way through the throng of patrons like a man on a mission. "You look terrible." "Rafe Talon," Dagger replied, his voice like gravel under a steamroller. "I'd say the same for you, but I'm trying out this new thing where I don't lie." "How's that working out?" Trix asked, folding her arms as she sized Dagger up. "Terribly," Dagger admitted with a shrug. "But it's good to see you. And who's this?" he asked, nodding at Zeke. "Zeke, our navigator," Rafe introduced. "He's the one who keeps us from ending up in a star or worse, the DMV. "Charmed," Zeke said, offering a mock bow. "So what brings you to my humble corner of this floating asylum?" Dagger asked, gesturing for them to sit. "Business or pleasure?" "Business," Rafe said, his tone turning serious. "We've got some info that needs to see the light of day, and you're the only one we trust to do it." Dagger's eyes narrowed, a predatory gleam in them. "How juicy are we talking?" "Juicy enough to ruin a few careers and maybe save a planet," Trix said, sliding a data stick across the table. Dagger picked it up, turning it over in his fingers as if weighing it for gold. "And you trust me with this?" "I'm touched. You're the only one we know who hates the right people," Rafe replied. Dagger grinned, a wolfish expression that wasn't entirely reassuring. "Flattery will get you everywhere, Captain. I'll take a look, see what I can do. But be warned, once this starts rolling, there'll be no stopping it." "We're counting on it," Rafe said, standing up. "Just make sure to aim it in the right direction." Dagger nodded, pocketing the data stick like it was a precious artifact. "Consider it done." As they left the bar, the noise and chaos of Locust Station closing in around them like a warm, filthy blanket, Rafe felt a flicker of hope. Maybe they'd actually pulled it off. Maybe they'd managed to make a difference without getting themselves killed. "Think he'll actually do it?" Zeke asked as they headed back toward the irony. "If he doesn't, we're screwed," Trix said bluntly. "But if he does," Rafe added with a grin, "we might just live to see another day." "Always nice to have options," Zeke quipped as they boarded the irony once more. "Set course for anywhere but here," Rafe ordered as the ship rumbled to life beneath them. "With pleasure," Zeke replied, plotting a course into the unknown. As the irony slipped away from Locust Station and into the stars, Rafe couldn't help but chuckle. They'd done it. Against all odds, they'd managed to stick it to the bad guys. Or at least, they'd given it their best shot. "Just another fine day in the universe," Rafe muttered to himself as he stared out into the endless void. "And to think I could have been a farmer." The floor of the irony was vibrating under Rafe Talon's boots as the ship hummed its metallic lullaby. Outside, the stars were just indifferent dots in an indifferent universe. But inside, things were about to get spicy, or deadly, depending on your perspective. They had left Locust Station behind, but the real fun was just getting started. "All right, team," Rafe announced, striding into the ship's cramped common area where Trix and Zeke were waiting. "We're heading back to that dreadnought. Time we found out why it's busier than a flea market on sale day." "Back to the dreadnought," Zeke groaned, leaning back in his seat like a man resigned to his fate. "Great. I was just thinking I haven't risked my life enough this week." Rafe ignored the sarcasm, turning to Trix. "We need to find out what else is hidden in there. Those files can't be the only thing worth risking our necks for." Trix nodded, her expression serious. "The encryption was top-notch. Whoever's in charge has resources, and bad taste in allies." "No accounting for taste," Rafe quipped, adjusting his jacket. It still smelled faintly of burnt coffee and the desperation of a man who should have chosen a career in retail. The irony slipped back into the void, making its way toward the dreadnought like a moth to a flame, or perhaps a fly to a particularly unappealing pile of something unpleasant. The dreadnought loomed ahead, all imposing angles and impractical design choices. If there was a contest for the ugliest ship in the galaxy, this would take home the grand prize, hands down. "What's our approach?" Zeke asked, his fingers dancing over the controls with the kind of grace he'd never apply to a dance floor. "Quietly," Rafe said. If we're lucky, they won't know we're coming until it's too late. Quietly in a ship called the Irony. Right, Zeke muttered. Subtle as a sledgehammer, the docking procedure was surprisingly smooth, and Rafe felt a pang of suspicion. Things never went this well. Suspiciously, the airlock hissed open without the usual protest of grinding metal. The universe was definitely screwing with them. "All right, keep your eyes open and your weapons ready," Rafe said, stepping into the dimly lit corridor of the dreadnought. "Let's see what kind of welcome party they've prepared." The ship's interior was a maze of corridors that seemed designed to get you lost or frustrated, preferably both. The lights flickered intermittently, casting long shadows that danced along the walls like ghosts with an agenda. "Looks like someone forgot to pay the electric bill," Zeke commented, peering into the gloom. "Or they're trying to save on mood lighting," Trix added, adjusting her visor to compensate for the dimness. They moved cautiously, the weight of the oppressive silence pressing down on them. Every step echoed in the empty corridors, a reminder that they were intruders in a place that didn't want them alive. "Anyone else get the feeling we're not alone?" Rafe asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "That would be your paranoia talking," Trix replied, though her grip on her blaster tightened. "Or it could be the cultists," Zeke suggested. "You know, the ones who love us for our charming personalities and not at all because they want to sacrifice us to their alien overlords." As if on cue, a door slid open ahead of them, revealing a group of robed figures who seemed to have misplaced their sense of humor along with their common sense. "Ah, the welcoming committee," Rafe said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "I didn't bring a gift." "Hope that's not a deal-breaker." The cultists didn't laugh, not even a polite chuckle. "Tough crowd. Intruders," one of the figures intoned, their voice echoing through the corridor like the ominous narrator of a bad horror flick. "You shall not defile our sacred ground." "Defile it?" Zeke asked, glancing around at the rust and grime. "Pretty sure it's doing a fine job of defiling itself." The cultists weren't impressed. They moved with purpose, weapons at the ready, reminding Rafe that diplomacy was probably off the table. "Looks like we're doing this the hard way," Rafe muttered, raising his blaster. Again, the corridor erupted into chaos, blaster bolts sizzling through the air as Rafe, Trix, and Zeke returned fire. The cultists may have had numbers on their side, but the crew of the Irony had something better, a complete disregard for their own safety. "Cover me," Rafe yelled, ducking behind a bulkhead as a bolt scorched the metal where his head had been moments before. "I've got a plan. Please tell me it doesn't involve dying," Zeke shouted back, laying down suppressing fire. "Not yet," Rafe grinned, darting out and launching a stun grenade down the corridor. "But it might involve a few broken bones." The grenade detonated with an eye-searing flash, and the cultists staggered, clutching at their eyes and howling in dismay. Rafe took the opportunity to charge forward, Trix and Zeke on his heels, covering him as they surged down the corridor. "Nicely done," Zeke panted, as they rounded a corner and put some distance between themselves and the stunned cultists. "I'm starting to think you enjoy this." "You think?" Rafe called back, taking a moment to reload. "I'd rather be sipping coffee on Europa, but life's full of disappointments." "Speaking of disappointments," Trix cut in, pointing to a sealed door at the end of the corridor. "I bet whatever they are hiding is behind that." "Naturally," Rafe sighed. "It's always the creepy door at the end of the hallway." With a few well-placed shots, they blasted the control panel, and the door slid open with all the enthusiasm of a teenager getting out of bed before noon. Inside, the room was a stark contrast to the rest of the ship, clean, well-lit, and filled with terminals that hummed with activity. "Looks like we've found the brains of the operation," Trix said, moving to examine the nearest terminal. "Let's see what they're hiding." Rafe and Zeke stood guard at the door, listening for any sounds of pursuit. For the moment, the corridor outside was silent, but Rafe knew better than to trust it. "Any luck?" he asked, glancing over at Trix as she worked her magic on the terminal. "Depends on what you call luck," she replied, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "I'm in, but it's heavily encrypted. These guys are serious about keeping their secrets. Let me guess, Zeke said. The kind of encryption that'll take hours to crack, more like days, Trix confirmed, a frown creasing her brow. But I might be able to speed it up if I can access the mainframe directly. Then we'd better hurry, Rafe said. I doubt the cultists are going to give us that much time. A sudden noise from the corridor made them all stiffen, and Rafe cursed under his breath. The cultists weren't done yet. Sounds like they are about ready for round two, Zeke observed, peering out into the corridor. Then let's give them a show, Rafe said, taking position. Trix, keep working. We'll buy you some time. The cultists returned with a vengeance, no more willing to negotiate than before. But Rafe and Zeke held their ground, trading shots with the robed figures who seemed undeterred by the prospect of imminent death. You know, Zeke said between shots, I always thought my epitaph would be something like "Here lies Zeke. Died doing what he loved." Only you could love this, Rafe replied, dodging a bolt that singed the air beside his ear. The firefight was a blur of noise and heat, the corridor filled with the acrid stench of ozone and desperation. Rafe felt the familiar adrenaline rush, the thing that kept him coming back to this life despite its many flaws, like a bad movie you just couldn't stop watching. Got it, Trix shouted suddenly, her voice cutting through the chaos. I'm in the mainframe. Then do your thing, Rafe called back, focusing on keeping the cultists at bay. We'll hold them off as long as we can. Trix worked quickly, her fingers dancing over the controls as she bypassed security protocols and searched for something, anything, that would give them an edge. Behind her, the terminal screens flashed with data, lines of code scrolling by like the world's most boring action sequence. I think I've found something, Trix said after a few tense minutes. Plans, coordinates. Looks like they're planning a full-scale attack on Earth. Because of course they are, Zeke muttered, squeezing off a shot that sent a cultist sprawling. Why not aim high? Can you copy it? Rafe asked, reloading with practiced speed. I'm on it, Trix replied, transferring the data to a storage device. Just a few more seconds. The cultists were pressing harder now, their numbers seemingly endless. Rafe gritted his teeth, firing as fast as he could, but it was a losing battle. They were running out of time. Got it, Trix shouted, pulling the storage device free. Let's get the hell out of here. Music to my ears, Rafe said, covering their retreat as they sprinted back down the corridor, the cultists in hot pursuit. The ship shuddered violently as they reached the airlock, the irony coming alive with a roar that made Rafe's heart race. Behind them, the cultists were still coming, but the crew didn't look back. Time to go, Zeke said, slapping the airlock controls as they piled into the ship. The door slammed shut, and the irony disengaged with a lurch that nearly sent them sprawling. Rafe stumbled to the cockpit, taking the controls with a steady hand and a wild grin. Let's see them catch us now, he said, punching the thrusters and sending the irony hurtling away from the dreadnought. As they shot back into the safety of the void, Rafe allowed himself a moment to breathe. They'd done it. They'd outsmarted the cultists and uncovered a plan that could change the course of history. Think we'll live long enough to regret this? Zeke asked, collapsing into his seat with a weary sigh. Rafe chuckled, the sound rich with relief and more than a little madness. Oh, definitely. But what's life without a little risk? Better than being dead, Trix pointed out, though her smile suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. With the dreadnought behind them and the stars stretching out ahead, the crew of the Irony settled back into their seats, ready to face the next adventure, or possibly a bullet, whichever came first. Just another fine day in space, Rafe said to himself, as the Irony carried them toward the unknown. And to think I could have been a farmer. Well, this piece of shit isn't going to fix itself, Rafe growled, staring at the blinking lights on the Irony's console. The ship creaked ominously, like an old man settling into a too-small chair. Zeke smirked from his seat, his boots propped up on a panel like he owned the place. You know, if it ever does decide to self-repair, I'm quitting. I signed up for this gig to avoid competent technology. Rafe ignored him, focusing instead on the display that showed the tangled mess of data Trix had pulled from the cult's mainframe. Their find was bigger than they'd imagined. Much bigger. The cult's tentacles stretched far beyond that rust bucket they just fled. Intel suggested infiltration deep into the U.S. government itself. Maybe someone should have told them politicians naturally defect without alien influence. Trix, Rafe called over, eyes still on the screen. How's the data? Anything else juicy in there? Trix sat hunched over her terminal, fingers moving faster than a caffeinated squirrel. Juicer than a squeezed lemon, boss. Judging by these files, our friendly neighborhood cultists have got more fingers in pies than a bored baker, Zeke snorted. Too bad they've got the brains of one too. Shut up, Zeke, Trix said, without looking up. Their stupidity doesn't make them any less dangerous. If even half of this is true, they're planning something big. Really big. Rafe rubbed his temples, trying to massage away the impending headache. Bigger than the We Love Aliens parade. Think Welcome to Earth, here's our nuclear codes big. Trix replied, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Rafe let out a breath that was mostly frustration. This wasn't just another insane cult trying to light candles and chant at the moon. Their influence was pervasive, infectious, like a bad pop song stuck on loop in your brain. Great. So we're supposed to stop a cult that's already in bed with the government and we can't even get decent coffee on this ship, Rafe mused, half to himself. Welcome to our lives, Zeke said, mimicking raising a glass to toast their misery. We're the reckless idiots who decided a little danger beats a safe desk job, says the man who almost got his head blown off twice today, Trix shot back, her fingers pausing just long enough to throw him a glare. Zeke shrugged. Occupational hazard. Besides, it's not a real firefight until you lose some hair. Rafe shook his head. Focus, people. We need a plan. A plan that keeps us alive long enough to enjoy the sweet, sweet taste of victory, or at least a drink that doesn't taste like recycled engine coolant. How about we crash a government server? Trix suggested with a wicked grin. Sneak in, snag what we need and slip out before they know we were there. Oh, sure, Zeke retorted. And after that, we can just politely ask the cultists to stop trying to kill us. Got a better idea? Rafe asked, knowing full well Zeke didn't. Zeke spread his hands. Nope, just the usual complaints. But if we're breaking into one of the most secure networks in known space, can we at least do it with style? Style is our middle name, Rafe said with a smirk. Right after Reckless. The plan was simple. Get into a safe zone, hack into a U.S. government server, download incriminating files, and expose the cult before their plan saw the light of day. Simple but not easy. The odds were about as good as finding a clean public restroom on Mars. Still, they had a shot, and that was all they needed. All right, Trix, get ready, Rafe instructed, glancing at Zeke. And you, try not to trip over your own feet. Zeke saluted lazily. I'll do my best, boss. Let's move, Rafe said, feeling the familiar mix of anxiety and excitement that came before diving headfirst into chaos. Asterisk, the irony slipped into orbit around Titan, the moon's thick haze lending just enough cover for them to avoid excessive attention from the locals. The ship's engines purred to a stop, and Rafe couldn't help but feel a twinge of pride. The old girl had her quirks, but she knew how to stay quiet when it counted. Cozy place, Zeke commented, peering out at the orange-brown smog. Like an armpit with better gravity. Focus, Trix said, strapping a portable console to her forearm. We've got work to do, and I'd rather not die in a place where I can't see the stars. Zeke gave an exaggerated sigh. Always with the dying talk, such a pessimist. Call it realism, Trix shot back, checking the data on her device. Rafe finished his mental checklist, nodding to himself. Okay, Trix, you're up. Find us a way in. Already on it, she replied, her voice all business now. Just need to slip past their firewall and, done, we're in. That was fast, Zeke observed, raising an eyebrow. Trix shrugged. They left their back door open, probably watching cat videos at work again. Let's hope it stays that way, Rafe said. Find us what we need and get out before they notice. The minutes ticked by, feeling like Eeyores as Trix navigated the digital landscape, searching for the files they needed. Rafe and Zeke stood by, watching the ship's sensors for any sign of trouble. So far, so good. And there it is, Trix said finally, an edge of triumph in her voice. Evidence of high-level collaboration. Names, dates, transactions. All of it. Perfect, Rafe said, a grin spreading across his face. Let's wrap it up and get the hell out of here. Not so fast, boys, Trix warned, her tone shifting to one of concern. Looks like they've got a trace on us. Rafe cursed under his breath. How long do we have? Long enough to make this interesting, Trix replied. But not long enough for a leisurely escape. Time to skedaddle, Zeke said, already moving to his station. Rafe took the helm, feeling the familiar surge of adrenaline. Punch it, kids, we've got places to be. The irony roared to life, engines burning bright as they made their hasty retreat. Behind them, an alert would be spreading through the network, but by the time anyone responded, they'd be long gone. Another flawless heist, Rafe said as they left Titan's atmosphere behind. We should take up bank robbing next. I don't think we have the wardrobe for it, Zeke remarked, glancing at his worn boots. Plus, banks have better security than whatever that was, Trix added, her satisfaction clear despite the tension. They were in the clear for now. But Rafe could feel the weight of their next move bearing down on him. They had a treasure trove of information, enough to shake the foundations of power. But with that came danger, more than they'd ever faced before. You know, Zeke said, breaking the silence, we might actually pull this off. Rafe chuckled, a sound filled with defiance. And pigs might pilot starships. But hey, let's give it a shot. For now, they'd relish their small victory, savor the fleeting thrill of the chase. The universe was vast and hostile, but it was also full of opportunity. Think the government will thank us for this? Zeke asked, his usual sarcasm lacing his words. Rafe laughed, a short, sharp bark. Not unless they like surprises, and from where I'm standing, we're one hell of a surprise. Trix sighed, but there was a faint smile on her face. Let's just hope it's a good one. The irony sailed through the void, leaving chaos in its wake, its crew armed with knowledge that could change everything or get them killed trying. Either way, Rafe figured, it beat a desk job. Next stop? Zeke inquired, leaning back and stretching with the nonchalance of a man oblivious to impending doom. Rafe shrugged, the weight of their mission settling back onto his shoulders. Wherever the next bad decision takes us. With the galaxy waiting beyond, they plunged onward, a ship full of misfits against a universe that didn't care. And honestly, Rafe couldn't think of a better way to spend a Tuesday. The irony cruised along through the vast nothingness, the stench of burnt coffee and despair still lingering in its recycled air. Rafe sat hunched over the console, feeling about as buoyant as a lead balloon. The data they'd snagged was enough to make any conspiracy nut salivate, but at what cost? He had an itch between his shoulder blades, an itch that screamed something was off, and not just the ship's temperamental cooling system. Trix was in her usual spot, eyes glued to her terminal like it whispered sweet promises of chaos. Zeke lounged nearby, half asleep with his feet up. Rafe shot him a glance that said, if you're gonna die, at least do it upright. Hey, Zeke, Rafe called. Think the cultists will send us a thank you note for stealing their secrets? Zeke snorted awake. Sure, right after they gift us an all-expenses-paid vacation to the nearest black hole. Trix glanced up, smirking. I'd settle for a card. Something tasteful with a bomb cleverly hidden inside. Rafe chuckled, though his mind was a whirlpool of unease. All right, Trix, tell me something good, or at least not soul-crushing. I found us a few more names in the files, she replied, tapping the screen. People high enough up the food chain to have serious indigestion now that we've screwed with their plans. Any chance they are part of a secret cult knitting circle too? Zeke asked, yawning. It's always the ones you least suspect, Trix said. The ones with the cat sweaters and innocent smiles. They're the true masterminds. Rafe leaned back, stretching until his spine popped. Fantastic. So we've got a list of potential lunatics, a government connection, and our charming personalities. What could possibly go wrong? The answer, as it turned out, was everything. An alarm blared to life, shrieking through the cabin like a banshee with a grudge. Rafe scrambled to the controls while Trix cursed under her breath. Zeke fell out of his chair, managing to look simultaneously offended and confused. "What the hell is that?" Rafe shouted over the noise. Trix's fingers danced across her console. "Proximity alert. Something big just jumped into our sector." "Define big," Zeke groaned, picking himself up. "Big enough to make us look like a roach next to a boot," Trix replied, her voice tight. Rafe's stomach did a little flip. "Please tell me it's not who I think it is." "Let's see," Trix said, pulling up the data. "Dreadnought class, unregistered, probably hostile, so yes." "Wonderful," Zeke muttered. "I love a good surprise party." Rafe's mind raced. The Dreadnought wasn't just any ship, it was a behemoth, a relic of war and bad fashion choices, armed to the teeth and then some. If it was here, something was very, very wrong. "Options?" Rafe asked, trying to keep the edge out of his voice. "Run like hell," Zeke offered. Trix shook her head. "Too late, they've got us in their sights." As if to confirm her words, the ship shuddered violently. Rafe grabbed the console to steady himself, cursing as the hull groaned in protest. "Guess they don't want to talk," Zeke said, a wry grin on his face. "Can't imagine why," Rafe replied. "Let's give them a reason to change their minds. Trix, any chance we can jam their signals?" "Already on it," she said, typing furiously. "But it's like trying to blind a cyclops with a flashlight." Another tremor rocked the irony, the Dreadnought system stirring to life with a hum that felt like doom. Rafe's hands flew over the controls, navigating through endless menus and error messages. "Zeke, get to the weapons systems," Rafe ordered. "We'll need everything we've got and then some." "On it, boss," Zeke said, sprinting off down the corridor. Trix glanced at Rafe, her expression grim. "You think this is a coincidence?" Rafe shook his head. "Nothing's ever a coincidence. Someone tipped them off. Question is, who?" The ship shuddered again, lights flickering as power surged. Rafe gripped the console tighter, feeling the cold fingers of fear curling around his heart. They were outmatched, outgunned, and out of time. "All right," Rafe muttered to himself. "Think, how do we get out of this one?" Trix's fingers stilled, her gaze meeting his. "There might be a way, but you're not gonna like it." "Try me," Rafe said, though his gut told him he'd regret it. "We blow the engine," Trix replied, her voice steady. "Use the shockwave to catapult us out of their range." Rafe stared at her, incredulous. "And what? Hope we don't end up as space debris." "It's either that or wait for them to vaporize us," Trix said. "Your call, boss." Rafe glanced at the screen, at the data they'd risked everything to retrieve. He'd known this job was dangerous, but he hadn't realized just how far down the rabbit hole it went. Betrayal was a heavy word, and it weighed heavy on his mind now. Someone had sold them out. Someone close. "Fine," Rafe said finally, jaw set. "Do it. Zeke won't be happy, but then he never is." Trix nodded, already working on the calculations. "You'll want to hold onto something. This is gonna be one hell of a ride." Rafe braced himself, feeling the thrum of the engines beneath his feet. The irony was many things, but reliable wasn't one of them. Still, she'd pulled through before. Maybe she would again. "Zeke, you copy?" Rafe barked into the comm, waiting for the familiar crackle. "Loud and clear," Zeke replied. "What's the plan?" "We're blowing the engine," Rafe said. "Hope you're wearing your lucky socks." There was a pause. "I knew I should have stuck with the casino gigs," Zeke grumbled. As the countdown began, Rafe felt a strange calm settle over him. It was an old feeling, one he'd had before every suicidal mission that somehow ended with him alive. Maybe this time would be different. But then again, maybe it wouldn't. "Here we go," Trix announced, her voice a mix of excitement and terror. The irony shuddered violently as the engine overloaded, the ship lurching forward with a force that sent Rafe sprawling. The world spun, a cacophony of alarms and clattering metal, and for a moment he was sure it was the end. But then, just as suddenly as it began, the chaos subsided. The irony drifted through space, the Dreadnought now a distant silhouette against the stars. "We did it!" Zeke's voice crackled over the comm, disbelief evident. Rafe hauled himself upright, wincing at the bruises he'd no doubt find later. "Trix status. We're alive," she said, her voice shaky but triumphant. "Barely, but alive." Rafe let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. They'd survived by the skin of their teeth, but survival was only the beginning. Someone had betrayed them, sold them out to the highest bidder, and Rafe Talon was nothing if not vengeful. "All right," he said, forcing himself back to his feet. "Time to find out who's been playing Judas." Trix nodded, determination in her eyes. "And make them wish they hadn't." Zeke's laughter echoed through the calm, tinged with the kind of madness that comes from cheating death. "I love this job." Rafe shook his head, a smile tugging at his lips despite everything. "Let's see if you're still saying that once we're knee-deep in trouble." The irony sailed on, battered but unbroken. The universe was vast, full of danger and betrayal, but Rafe and his crew were not about to back down. Not now, not ever. They had a mission to complete and a traitor to unmask, and if they had to burn a path through the stars to do it, so be it. "Next stop?" Zeke inquired once more, his voice filled with renewed energy. Rafe considered the question, his mind already whirring through possibilities. "Wherever there's a trail to follow, and maybe a decent bottle of whiskey," Trix chuckled. "Well, at least you've got your priorities straight." With a laugh and a collective sense of purpose, they set a course for the unknown. The galaxy was a cruel mistress, but they were the masters of their own fate, and with a little luck they might just outrun the darkness closing in. For in the unforgiving void, where trust was a luxury and betrayal a certainty, one thing remained true. Rafe and his crew would fight to the bitter end and maybe, just maybe, come out on top. The irony limped through space like a drunken sailor, and Rafe Talon was its ragged captain trying to hold it all together with duct tape and sheer will. The ship's cooling system, that delightful piece of technology, was once again acting up, alternating between Arctic chills and Sahara-level heat waves. Rafe had half a mind to chuck it out the nearest airlock. Trix was still glued to her terminal, tapping away like her fingers were possessed. Whatever she was doing, Rafe hoped it was more productive than her usual chaos creation. Zeke had somehow procured a cup of God knows what, sipping it with the kind of satisfaction that suggested it might actually be poison. "Someone's chuffed," Rafe said, nodding at Zeke's cup. Zeke barely looked up. "If this kills me, at least I won't have to worry about the ship falling apart mid-flight." "That's the spirit," Trix chimed in without glancing away from her screen. "But if it does kill you, dibs on your rations." "Deal," Zeke said. "You can also have my collection of questionable holovids." "Sweet of you," Trix replied, her tone indicating she couldn't care less. Rafe pinched the bridge of his nose. "All right, kids, time to get serious. We're running on fumes and good intentions here." "We've still got the data," Trix pointed out, a hint of triumph in her voice. "It's just about cracking it open." "Sure, and once we do, maybe we can invite the Dreadnought crew over for a nice little chat over tea," Zeke drawled, shaking his cup for emphasis. Rafe stood, moving to the center of the cramped mess that served as their cockpit. "Listen up. We need to figure out who sold us out, and fast. We can't keep dodging bullets forever. Unless we get really good at it," Zeke offered with a smirk. "Sure, and maybe next week I'll win the intergalactic lottery and retire to Europa," Rafe shot back. "But first, we need to stop a cult and find a traitor, preferably in that order." Trix finally looked up, her face lit with the glow of her terminal. "I've been combing through what's left of the data. I think I've found something useful." "Spit it out," Rafe said, leaning against the console. Trix tapped a few keys, bringing up a star map dotted with blinking indicators. "There's a pattern in their communication logs. They've been coordinating with a place called the Ember Reach." "Sounds cozy. Bet they have a nice reception for traitors and miscreants," Zeke commented. "More like a death trap with a welcome mat," Trix replied dryly. "But if we can intercept their communications, we might just catch them with their pants down." "And here I thought you were all about creating chaos," Rafe said with a grin. "Oh, I am," Trix assured him. "This is just a different flavor." "So we head to Ember Reach, intercept their signals, and hopefully avoid getting vaporized," Rafe summarized. "Piece of cake. More like a souffle," Zeke muttered. "Deflates at the slightest provocation." Rafe crossed his arms, thinking. "We need a plan, something that'll make these bastards regret ever crossing paths with us." Trix's eyes gleamed with mischief. I've got an idea. It's risky, but when haven't we been? Rafe gestured for her to continue. Lay it on me. We bounce our signal off one of the old satellites in the Ember Reach, Trix explained. Mask our presence while we piggyback on their transmissions. And this won't get us instantly fried how? Zeke asked, arching an eyebrow. Simple, Trix said. We use the same trick they used on us. Send out decoys, make them think we're somewhere we're not. Rafe nodded, his brain already firing on all cylinders. All right, let's do it. Zeke, prep whatever weapons we've got left. We'll need to hold them off if things get sticky. Sticky like the inside of this ship, Zeke quipped, standing up with a stretch. I'll see what I can scrounge. Trix was back at her terminal, fingers dancing across the keys with a renewed vigor. This might just work, Rafe. Rafe watched her work, feeling the familiar rush of adrenaline that came with a good plan. Hope so. My backup plan involves hoping they're allergic to sarcasm. Always a solid strategy, Trix agreed. But I'd rather not bet our lives on your charm. Rafe turned away, looking at the stars through the viewports. They were far from out of the woods, but at least they had a direction, a purpose. Even if that purpose involved sticking it to some very dangerous people. Zeke returned, arms laden with an assortment of weapons and gadgets that looked more like a scrapyard exploded than a tactical loadout. Got what I could. A mix of might work and probably lethal. Perfect, Rafe said. Just the kind of odds I like. Zeke handed a few pieces to Rafe and Trix, grinning like a maniac. Let's make sure they remember who they're dealing with. I plan to leave quite the impression, Trix said, loading a small pistol with a satisfying click. The plan was simple, in the same way wrestling an angry space bear was simple. Get to Ember Reach, intercept the transmissions, and try not to die horribly. But Rafe had faith in his crew, or at least in their ability to make an entertaining last stand. All right, let's light this candle, Rafe said, moving to the pilot's seat and taking the controls. Next stop, Ember Reach. The irony groaned as it changed course, the ship's systems flickering like a nightclub in a power outage. Rafe hoped it would hold together just a little longer. Long enough to make their move and ideally not explode in a glorious fireball. As the stars streaked past, Rafe felt a strange sense of calm. The universe may have been out to get them, but they were about to prove that humanity had its own ways of fighting back. Sometimes with ingenuity, sometimes with sheer stupidity, and often with a reckless blend of both. Brace yourselves, Rafe said, glancing at his crew. This is gonna be one hell of a ride, Trix smirked. Wouldn't have it any other way, Zeke nodded, a dangerous glint in his eyes. Let's give them a show they won't forget. The Ember Reach loomed ahead, a swirling mass of debris and forgotten technology. It was the kind of place that swallowed ships whole, spitting them out as wreckage for scavengers to pick clean. Rafe wondered briefly if they'd be joining that illustrious club. Approaching the coordinates, Trix announced, her voice steady. Decoy signals are ready to deploy. On my mark, Rafe instructed, watching the readouts. 3, 2, 1. Now. Trix hit the switch, sending a cascade of false signals bursting from their ship, each one a red herring designed to confuse and misdirect. If they were lucky, it would buy them the time they needed. We've got a window, Trix said, fingers flying over her terminal. Their systems are chasing ghosts. Let's hope those ghosts keep them busy, Zeke added, watching the scanners intently. Rafe eased the irony into position, close enough to tap into the communications but far enough to remain undetected. All right, Trix, do your thing. Trix initiated the data tap, her focus absolute. The terminal beeped softly as streams of information began to flow, a torrent of encrypted messages and hidden directives. It was their golden ticket if they could decipher it in time. Got it, Trix said, her voice a mix of relief and determination. We've got their comms, now to find something useful. Zeke, keep an eye on that scanner, Rafe ordered. We can't afford a surprise visit. I'm on it, Zeke said, his usual levity replaced by concentration. We've got company, but they are still chasing phantoms. Time ticked by, each second feeling like a lifetime. Rafe's hands hovered over the controls, ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. But for now, they were safe, tucked away in a pocket of chaos they'd created. "Got something?" Trix said suddenly, her eyes lighting up. "A list of coordinates, locations they're planning to hit, and more importantly, the names involved." Rafe felt a surge of vindication. They'd done it. They'd pulled off the impossible yet again. "Send it to my console," he instructed. "Let's see who our friends really are." Trix transferred the data and Rafe scanned the list, his anger growing with each name he recognized. People he'd trusted, people who'd worn friendly smiles and offered empty assurances. "So," Zeke said, glancing over Rafe's shoulder, "looks like we've got a few calls to make." "Yeah," Rafe said, his voice a low growl. "Time to let them know the party's over." The irony drifted in the shadow of Ember Reach, a silent witness to the betrayal that had nearly cost them everything. But now, they had the upper hand and Rafe intended to use it for all it was worth. "All right," Rafe said, his determination renewed. "We've got what we came for. Let's get the hell out of here before they realize what happened." Trix nodded, already working on disengaging their tap and preparing for a quick exit. "Ready when you are, boss." "Zeke, anything on the scanners?" Rafe asked, hoping the answer wouldn't involve imminent doom. "All clear," Zeke replied, a hint of amusement back in his voice. "Looks like they're still chasing ghosts." "Good," Rafe said. "Let's keep it that way." The irony powered up, engines humming as they prepared to make their escape. Rafe glanced at his crew, a sense of camaraderie binding them together in the face of overwhelming odds. "Let's get moving," Rafe said, a smile tugging at his lips. "We've got a job to finish." With a final burst of speed, the irony shot away from Ember Reach, leaving behind a trail of confusion and chaos. They were battered, bruised, but unbroken, and as they sailed through the stars, Rafe knew one thing for certain: they were far from done. "Next stop, revenge," Trix said, a wicked grin on her face. "Couldn't have said it better myself," Rafe replied. "Let's show them what happens when you cross us." The irony shot through space like a half-drunk comet, a testament to human ingenuity, or idiocy, depending on how you looked at it. Rafe was never quite sure which, but in his line of work, the two were practically interchangeable. The ship's recycled air had the crisp tang of anxiety, and the cooling system did its best impression of indecisive weather, oscillating between Arctic tundra and sweaty armpit. "So, we're really doing this?" Zeke asked, eyes locked on the scanner. His cup of dubious contents had been abandoned in favor of a jury-rigged weapon that looked like it wanted to explode in his hands. "Last chance to back out and become space hermits," Rafe snorted. "Where's your sense of adventure, Zeke? Think of it as a high-stakes poker game. Only instead of cards, we've got guns, and instead of money, it's our lives." "Sounds like my kind of party," Trix chimed in, her fingers dancing over the terminal like a pianist intent on breaking her own piano. She was sifting through the treasure trove of treachery they'd stolen, trying to make sense of the tangled web of betrayal and bad fashion choices. "Let's just hope they haven't stacked the deck against us too much." "Well, if they have, we'll just have to cheat better," Rafe said, a lopsided grin spreading across his face. "We've got the coordinates, we've got the names. It's about time we crash their little shindig." Zeke grunted, clearly skeptical but unwilling to argue the point. "Just saying, if this plan goes south, we might have to start looking into career opportunities on Europa. I heard they need baristas." "Great, more coffee," Trix said, rolling her eyes. "I swear if we make it out of this, I'm banning caffeine for a month." Rafe leaned back in the pilot's seat, letting the hum of the engine soothe his nerves. "All right, let's not get ahead of ourselves. First things first, we need to hit these bastards where it hurts." "And where exactly is that, Captain Optimism?" Zeke asked, his sarcasm thicker than the ship's emergency manual, which nobody had read in years. "Right in their smug, backstabbing faces," Rafe replied. "Starting with the closest target. Trix, what's the first location on that list?" Trix brought up the data with a flick of her wrist. "Looks like some outpost on the edge of civilized space, the kind of place where shady deals go to get a tan." "Let's pay them a visit then," Rafe said, steering the ship toward their new destination. Time to see how friendly our so-called allies really are. The outpost came into view, a blot on the canvas of stars, as welcoming as a rusty nail in a handshake. It was a collection of cramped modules and flickering lights, each structure seemingly designed to scream, "We're up to no good." "Charming," Trix muttered, her eyes scanning the readouts. "I'm sure the brochure mentioned something about a 5-star experience." "Yeah, 5 stars of run while you can," Zeke added, cocking his weapon with a metallic click. "How do you want to play this, Rafe?" Rafe thought for a moment, weighing their options or lack thereof. "Let's start with the direct approach. If that doesn't work, we'll improvise." "Improvise?" Trix echoed with a sigh. "That's just a fancy word for make a mess, isn't it?" "Pretty much," Rafe admitted, unbuckling his harness and standing up. "Zeke, you ready?" "Born ready," Zeke replied, though his face suggested he might have been born more for knitting than gunfights. They suited up, the familiar weight of weapons and armor settling over them like an old, uncomfortable friend. Rafe could feel the tension rising, a cocktail of fear and excitement that made his heart race. He glanced at his crew, his makeshift family, and gave a nod. "All right, let's do this. Trix, keep the ship ready for a quick getaway. We might need to leave in a hurry." "Don't worry," she said, giving a mock salute. "I'll keep the engines humming, ready to whisk us away from certain doom." With that, Rafe and Zeke made their way to the airlock, the clang of their boots echoing through the corridors. The door opened with a hiss, and they stepped into the void, tethered only by the thin line of trust in their plan, or what passed for one. The outpost was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that made you want to check your pulse to ensure you hadn't accidentally died. They moved cautiously, weapons at the ready, eyes scanning for any sign of life or death, given the circumstances. "Looks deserted," Zeke whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of his own breathing. "Think they saw us coming, or they're just really bad hosts," Rafe muttered, peering into one of the windows. "Let's find out." They entered the main module, the door creaking ominously as it swung open. Inside, the place was a mess, papers and electronics strewn about like the aftermath of a tantrum. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and regret. "Looks like they left in a hurry," Zeke said, nudging a chair that teetered on the edge of collapse. "Or they're planning one hell of a surprise party." Rafe scanned the room, his eyes narrowing as he spotted a terminal in the corner, still active. Bingo! Let's see what they were up to. They approached the terminal warily, half expecting it to explode or sprout legs and run away. But it stayed put, displaying a series of coordinates and names that matched their stolen data. "Looks like they were planning to meet up with our old friends," Rafe said, pointing at the screen. "We might have just stumbled onto their secret club." "Great," Zeke replied dryly. "Do we get jackets?" Rafe was about to reply when a sound interrupted him, a soft click, followed by the unmistakable whir of a weapon powering up. He turned slowly, his heart sinking as he faced the source. A figure stood in the doorway, clad in armor and holding a rifle that looked far too enthusiastic about its job. The helmet obscured their face, but the stance was unmistakable. They were not here to chat. "Well, well," the figure said, their voice distorted by the helmet's speakers. "Look what the cat dragged in." "Nice to meet you too," Rafe said, raising his hands in what he hoped was a disarming gesture. "We were just admiring your decor, very post-apocalyptic chic." The figure didn't lower the weapon, but Rafe caught a hint of amusement in their stance. "You're not supposed to be here." "Yeah, well, we're not big on following rules," Rafe shot back, his mind racing for a way out. "Besides, we heard there was a party." The figure chuckled, a low, mechanical sound. "You've got guts, I'll give you that, but this ends here." Rafe was about to retort when Zeke took a subtle step forward, his hand inching toward his weapon. The figure noticed, tensing, and Rafe cursed inwardly. They were outgunned and outmaneuvered, their bravado on the edge of backfiring. "Look," Rafe said, trying to buy time. "I know we're on opposite sides here, but maybe we can come to an understanding. You let us go, we pretend we didn't see anything." The figure tilted their head, considering. And why would I do that? Because, Rafe said, flashing a grin that was all teeth. If you don't, you're gonna have one hell of a mess to clean up. It was a bluff, a desperate gamble that relied on their captor's uncertainty more than anything. But it was all they had, and Rafe was a firm believer in the power of reckless optimism. The figure hesitated, their weapon wavering slightly. It was enough. Zeke moved like lightning, drawing and firing in one smooth motion. The shot rang out, a deafening crack that reverberated through the module, and the figure staggered back, their weapon clattering to the floor. Rafe didn't waste a second, diving for cover as the world exploded into chaos. Zeke was already on the move, taking advantage of the distraction to close the distance and finish the job. The figure went down hard, a graceless tumble that ended with a crunch. "Nice work," Rafe said, breathing hard as he joined Zeke. "Remind me to never play poker with you." Zeke shrugged, nudging the fallen figure with his boot. "Guess they weren't expecting us to fight back." "Good," Rafe said, wiping sweat from his brow. "Let's keep it that way." They gathered what they could from the terminal, downloading the data onto a portable drive. The information was invaluable, a roadmap of deceit and conspiracy that would help them dismantle the cult's influence once and for all. "All right, let's get out of here," Rafe said, tucking the drive away. "We've got what we need. Time to hit the next target." Zeke nodded, a grim smile playing on his lips. "Hope they are ready. We're bringing our A-game." As they made their way back to the irony, Rafe felt a renewed sense of purpose. They were making progress, one small victory at a time, and with each step the odds of survival seemed a little less bleak. "One down, a few more to go," Rafe murmured, as they boarded the ship and sealed the airlock behind them. Trix was waiting, her expression a mix of relief and impatience. "Took you long enough." "Ran into some trouble," Rafe said, settling into the pilot's seat. "But we got what we came for. How's the ship?" "Still in one piece," Trix replied, flipping switches with practiced ease. "Next stop." Rafe brought up the list of coordinates, his gaze hardening. "Next stop, the heart of the beast." "Sounds cozy," Zeke said, dropping into his seat with a groan. "Let's hope they roll out the red carpet." Rafe chuckled, engaging the thrusters and setting a course for their next destination. "If they don't, we'll just have to make our own entrance." The irony surged forward, a battered arrow cutting through the vast expanse of space. Rafe watched the stars blur past, his mind already strategizing their next move. It was a daunting task, but they were more than ready for it. "Hang on, folks," he said, a grin tugging at his lips. "This ride's far from over." With that, the irony disappeared into the black, leaving behind the outpost and its secrets. They had a mission, a purpose, and nothing, not cults, conspiracies, or cosmic indifference, was going to stand in their way. The universe might have been a cold, unforgiving place, but Rafe and his crew had something that couldn't be quantified or calculated. An unyielding spirit, a refusal to back down, and of course, a stubborn habit of proving everyone wrong. "Let's finish this," Rafe murmured, determination burning in his eyes. "On our terms." The irony glided through space like a drunk on a Sunday morning stroll, not quite sure if it was headed in the right direction but too stubborn to stop. Rafe sat in the pilot's seat, eyes locked on the console that seemed hell-bent on making his life difficult. The cooling system chose that moment to puff out a gust of frigid air, sending a shiver down his spine. He muttered a curse under his breath, his thoughts a jumbled mix of plans and regrets. "Whoever designed this ship deserves a medal," he grumbled. "For services to misery." Trix, perched at her terminal, didn't bother looking up. "You say that every time the temperature changes, Rafe." "Yeah, well, it's a consistent kind of disappointment," he shot back, rubbing his hands together for warmth. "Speaking of which, how's our data looking?" Trix made a face that suggested she'd rather be anywhere else. "Oh, you know, just your average galactic conspiracy. Coordinated attacks, government infiltration, a cult with a god complex. The usual bedtime reading." Zeke snorted from where he was seated, weapon across his lap. "At least our hobbies are consistent." "Consistency's good," Rafe said, feigning cheerfulness. "Means we know what to expect when everything goes to hell." The atmosphere on the irony was a cocktail of tension and gallows humor, the kind that only came from staring down the barrel of impending doom. But beneath it all, there was a spark, a stubborn refusal to give up, to let the universe have the last laugh. "Next stop, Heart of the Beast," Rafe announced, more to himself than anyone. "Let's hope they've got room for a couple of uninvited guests." Zeke shrugged, the motion accompanied by the metallic clink of his weapon shifting. "We'll make room, one way or another." Trix tapped at her terminal, eyes scanning lines of text with the intensity of someone seeking meaning in a cosmic joke. "Just remember, this isn't a suicide mission. We're here to stop the cult, not become martyrs for a cause nobody but us cares about." Rafe nodded, though he knew the line between heroics and sheer idiocy was razor thin. "We'll stop them, or at the very least make them wish they'd never crossed us." The ship shuddered slightly, an indication they were approaching their destination. Locust Station loomed ahead, a monstrosity of metal and ill-conceived architecture, like someone had decided to build a space station using only bad decisions and duct tape. "Guess this is it," Rafe said, his voice edged with a mixture of apprehension and resolve. "Let's make it count." As they prepared to dock, the familiar clamor of tension filled the air. Trix double-checked their borrowed data, ensuring they had everything they needed to expose the cult's operations. Zeke ran through a final check of his equipment, his weapon an extension of his resolve. Rafe took a deep breath, the weight of their mission resting heavily on his shoulders. "Remember, we're doing this for humanity, because if we don't, nobody else will." Zeke chuckled dryly. "And because I'd hate to think we went through all this just to let them win." "Exactly," Rafe agreed, glancing at his crew. His family, really. "Let's show them what we're made of." With those words, they disembarked from the irony, stepping into the artificial gravity of Locust Station. The air was stale, the kind that clung to your throat like a bad memory. They moved with purpose, keeping to the shadows as they navigated the labyrinthine corridors. It was a gamble, their entire plan resting on the element of surprise and the sheer audacity of their actions. But it was all they had, and in a universe that thrived on betrayal and deception, it was enough. They reached the heart of the station, a command center that pulsed with activity. Cultists moved with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine, their faces obscured by masks that reduced them to mere cogs in the greater scheme. "All right, here's the plan," Rafe whispered, his voice barely audible. "We take out their communication first, then broadcast the data. Let them choke on their own secrets." Trix nodded, fingers twitching with anticipation. "I've got the codes ready." "Just say the word." "Word," Zeke muttered, a ghost of a smile on his lips. Rafe grinned, adrenaline coursing through his veins. "Let's do this." They moved in synchronization, a well-practiced dance of defiance. Zeke took point, his weapon silencing the few guards stationed at the entrance with brutal efficiency. Trix was already at the console, her fingers flying over the controls as she initiated the data transfer. "Almost there," she muttered, a triumphant gleam in her eyes. "Got it, broadcasting now." The main screen flickered, then burst to life with a torrent of information. Names, dates, operations, all the damning evidence they'd gathered on the cult's activities spread across the station's network. For a moment there was silence, an eerie calm before the inevitable storm. Then chaos erupted. Cultists scrambled, their carefully constructed facade crumbling under the weight of their own duplicity. "Time to go," Rafe shouted, already moving toward the exit. "Before they figure out where we are." They retraced their steps, urgency propelling them forward. Behind them, alarms blared, a cacophony of desperation and panic. But they didn't stop, didn't look back, not until they were safely aboard the irony. As the airlock sealed shut, Rafe let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "We did it." Zeke slumped against the wall, exhaustion etched into his features. "I'll believe it when we're clear of this place." Trix, catching her breath, glanced at the screen showing the chaos they'd left in their wake. "They're going to be busy cleaning up this mess for a while." Rafe nodded, a grin spreading across his face. "Good. Gives us time to figure out what to do next." Zeke raised an eyebrow. Next, we're not done yet, Rafe shrugged, leaning back in his seat. Well, we've still got the coordinates to the cult's other operations, and since when have we ever left a job half-finished? Trix groaned, but there was a hint of amusement in her eyes. You're a glutton for punishment, Rafe. Maybe, he admitted, warmth spreading in his chest. Or maybe I just like proving the universe wrong. The irony slipped away from Locust Station, another victory added to their growing list. It wasn't the end, far from it, but it was a step in the right direction, a testament to their tenacity, their refusal to give in. As they sailed through the void, Rafe couldn't help but reflect on the events that had brought them here. Humanity was flawed, riddled with contradictions and frailties, yet it was also resilient, capable of defying the odds and rising above adversity. To humanity, he said softly, raising an imaginary glass. May we continue to piss off everyone who underestimates us. Zeke chuckled, shaking his head. I'll drink to that. Trix nodded, a genuine smile tugging at her lips. Here's to humanity. And here's to us. The irony cruised through space, its crew united by a shared purpose and an unyielding spirit. They were far from perfect, but perfection was overrated anyway. What mattered was their determination to forge their own path, to stand against the darkness and refuse to be cowed. As they continued their journey, Rafe found himself filled with a renewed sense of hope. The universe might have been a bleak, indifferent place, but as long as they had each other, as long as there were those willing to fight for what was right, there was a chance for redemption. Let's see what other trouble we can stir up, Rafe said, a mischievous glint in his eyes. We've got time, Trix replied, her tone playful, and plenty of bad guys left to annoy. Zeke snorted, settling back into his seat. Bring it on. With laughter in their hearts and determination in their souls, the crew of the Irony pressed on, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The universe was vast and unforgiving, but they were more than up to the task. And somewhere in the cosmic expanse, a cult leader was probably questioning their life choices.